is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 546. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how are you?
Doing all right.
Hanging in there?
Weather's nice. Yeah. Weather's nice. So taking the dog out every day certainly helps get a bit of fresh air. And I'm excited to get Constructed back when they ban companions on Monday or whatever they do.
Yeah, lots of speculation about what they're going to do there. Ban them, maybe change the rules. They did say in an article that they were open to that. It's safe to assume that won't affect Limited, though, right?
I would be surprised. There actually is a possibility it does if they change the way companions work. If they do something like say, hey, if you start with a companion, you have to put a card back, like you mulligan to 6, or if in order to draw your companion, you need to pay 3 mana to put your companion into your hand, or something along those lines. Like, I would imagine that would affect Limited as well if you're changing the rules. So there is a possibility of that.
Okay, interesting. Well, we'll keep an eye on that and give an update if it does happen to affect us Limited junkies. So we've got more Q&A. Look, we got so many questions on that last one, and we weren't able to get to nearly as many as we wanted. And there's an awesome sort of spread of topics from fun, silly stuff to strategic to more real life, that kind of stuff, questions in there. And I really didn't want to let those get away from us. So we've decided to finish those questions or get at least as many as we can done in this week's episode. Really looking forward to it. Once again, the questions are provided by our patrons. That's one of the benefits you get by being a patron, is that when we need questions for the show, or if we have a special guest coming along, I'll usually put a post up to add to the questions. Because just crowdsourcing this type of thing to figure out what our audience really wants to hear and needs to hear is one of the really great things about Patreon. You can find information on patreon.com/limited resources about how you can sign up for that. And thank you very much to everybody who does. Also, the show's brought to you by Channel Fireball, channelfireball.com, the place to go for everything you need. Back open and in business again, running things like before. So, not quite at full capacity, but you can now put orders. You can sell cards back to them. And in fact, there's some cool stuff around that, right, Luis? Some more stuff with selling cards back.
Yeah, we're doing the Buy Less Bonanza 2. We are once again offering a Black Lotus. So if the difference, though, is now you get an entry for every $10 of cards you sell us. So we're going to be doing a grand prize drawing at the end of June. So cards you sell us in May or June. And then, besides the Black Lotus, we're also raffling away, 40 Shocklands, store credit, boxes, that sort of thing, plus weekly prizes. But one thing that's really cool to kind of follow up on what we mentioned last week is we actually announced, with actual lead time this time, the next CFB Showdown. The CFB Pro Showdown is going to happen on June 27th, so that's next month. And it's going to have actually Reed as the end boss. So the way this tournament works, it's a free tournament for any member of CFB Pro. And you play, we're doing store credit prizes. Then the winner gets to play against Reed to double their prize. So it was a lot of fun. We did ours last week, and it was a blast. And so we're running it back. Did
you win?
I did. I won my end boss match to protect the store credit. We'll see if Reed can do the same.
Man, you guys aren't making it easy. You have to play against you, and then the next person has to play against Reed Duke. It's like, geez, you really got to earn that doubler. But it is a multiplier. I mean, come on.
And it's a free roll where they still win first place prize. They're not, they don't. It's just whether they can get a bonus prize.
Oh man, you should have an option where they can play for triple or lose it all.
Yeah, we might offer that option with Reed, but they didn't want that on the table with me.
Oh, wow. Jeez, you guys are so brutal to each other. All right, so, yeah, you can check that out at channelfireball.com. Very cool stuff going on over there as we work our way through this tough situation. We've got a crack-a-pack here, though, once again, it is a virtual one. Let me fake open a pack here for you. Oh, there it is. The pack's open. Our first card is Whisper Squad.
This card's actually gone up quite a bit in my estimation.
Yeah, it's actually pretty good.
I'm not to the point where I want to first pick a Whisper Squad, but I'll fourth pick a Whisper Squad these days if I'm already in a humans or sacrifice theme.
Yeah. Then you're in that interesting position where the third Whisper Squad is like, okay, I did it, right? Like I'm good there. Of course, if you can get more, that's nice. But if you only end up with 2, it's like, oh man, what if I draw them both? That kind of thing. I have ran 2 in a deck though. You do what you got to do style. Next is Sudden Spinnerets. That's the green instant that untaps your creature and gives it +1/+3 until end of turn and puts a reach counter on it.
Yeah, it's a good trick, but it's still just a combat trick and not something, especially in a format with tons of awesome removal, that you really want to be taking too early.
Yeah, it's interesting. The combat tricks in this format, in my mind, have been really pushed out by that removal. They've put some decent combat tricks, nothing to shake your fist at there, but at the same time, I rarely end up running them because they're just outclassed. That you can just do better for that card slot. And there doesn't seem to be too many decks that are really so all in aggro that they just want to have the kind of classic curve out combat tricks, removal spells type deck. There's a little more going on in the set. So even a decent combat trick, only green for that. And you don't play it. Next is Memory Leak. We both love this card. 2 and a black sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You can exile a card from it or from their graveyard. But critically, it has cycling for 1, so it can kind of go anywhere. Big fan of Memory Leak.
Yeah, Memory Leak is quite good and an early front runner.
Yeah, so. Blade Banish is next. That's the 3 and a white instant exile target creature with power 4 or greater. Playable, but if you're playing a lot of best of ones, I've just been leaving it in the board.
Yeah, I agree. It's not a card that I ever feel is necessary for a deck. And, my point about removal still stands. There's tons of awesome removal spells, so you don't really need to be scraping for this very often.
That's right. Greater Sandworm is next, the greatest. That's 5GG, 7/7, can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, and cycling 2. This is responsible for one of the nastiest 1/2 punches if you don't have access to that removal, where, he gets cycled into the graveyard and then brought back with whatever it's called, and it has lifelink, and it's, very difficult to deal with. That card's awesome. I still like Memory Leak over it. Helica Glider is next. It's the 2 and a white 2/2. You can give it first strike or flying counter when it ETBs. It's fine. Next is Honey Mammoth. That's the 6/6 for 4GG that ETBs and gains you 4 life, but Greater Sandworm is better. Lava Serpent, 5 and a red, 5/5 haste with cycling 2. Good card too, but I still like Memory Leak over these ones. Where are you at this point?
Yeah, I would still be on Memory Leak, even though it's kind of unfortunate because I don't know. Like, this is the problem I have with 1 mana cycling without going too much further down this rabbit hole, is that Memory Leak is a good card and the flexibility makes it powerful, but a lot of these cards are cooler and we still, I don't think, should take them over Memory Leak. So our next card is going to change my opinion here, but I am on Memory Leak midway through the pack.
Yeah, I wanted to check in with you because the next one is definitely our pick from the commons so far. It's Snare Tactician. That's the 2 and a white 2/3. Whenever you cycle a card, tap target creature an opponent controls. Boy, that feels like it should have been an uncommon, doesn't it, Luis?
It really does. So yeah, I would be picking Snare Tactician here.
For sure.
Cycling's not as open as it used to be, but you know what? If you first pick Snare Tactician, you can still kind of try to cut it as best you can, and you don't need that many cycling cards to make Snare Tactician a playable. Like a black-white humans deck that has like 5 to 7 cyclers, I would still generally tend to play Snare Tactician.
That's right. Next is Tentative Connection, which is the 3 and a red, steal your opponent's creature, untap it, it gains haste until end of turn, or I guess it's not opponents, it's just target creature. It's a sorcery, but also it costs 3 less to cast if you control a creature with menace, which is kind of bizarre.
Yeah, it's a strong card in the right circumstances. Nothing you'd want to take super early, but good to keep in mind for like wheels, because when you do have a red-black sack deck, this card can get quite strong, and especially if you do have some menace creatures in it, then it leads to some really disgusting turns.
Right. Next card is probably the most confused card in the whole set. It's Regal Leosaur. It's red-white, so you're thinking, all right, sweet, this is going to make my cycling deck awesome. It's a 2/2 with mutate for 1 red-red, 1 white-white, or 1 white-red. And whenever this creature mutates, other creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. Boy, I remember when we did the set review and we looked at these, these uncommons, the gold uncommons, as potential signposts, and they were kind of throwing us off. And this is one of the big reasons why. It's like there is just not a red-white mutate deck. Like white has a ton of humans in it. It makes it difficult to get mutate going. This is some weird aggressive version of mutate, even though most of them seem to be more value focused. What a weird card to have in the set. I just have never found a home for it.
I think that you can draft an aggressive red-white go-wide deck that can use this. Also, the mutate is hybrid, so you can play this like in red-black, for example. But yeah, Regal Leosaur is mostly left out of the cold. There's a counter strategy to the cycling, which is if you assume most people in red-white are drafting cycling and you try to go for the aggressive cards like Regal Leosaur, Helica Glider, like that's in this pack, that kind of thing that the recycling deck doesn't want, you can actually end up in a decent spot there.
Yeah, just it is such a card that doesn't have a home in the format, so consistently. Next is Proud Wild Bonder. This one is 2 red, 2 green, or 2 green-red for a 4/3 trample human warrior, and it gives your creatures with trample super trample. You may have this creature assign its combat damage as though it weren't Blocked.
It's a good card. The fact that it's a human really, really bums me out because this is the kind of card you'd love to have in a lot of mutate decks, but it doesn't work super well. Yeah, it's also flexible because it's hybrid, but I'm not taking this over Snare Tactician.
Right.
Or Memory Link for that matter.
Yeah, agree. Next is a card I really like, makes for some cool moments in the format. It's Titanoth Rex. That's 7 green for an 11/11 trample. That's right. 9 mana, 11/11 trampler at uncommon. But you can cycle it for 1 and a green, and when you do, you put a trample counter on target creature you control. The trample counter, fine, you'll take it, but honestly, it's not a devastating effect in most scenarios. But the fact that there's a couple of uncommon ways to get this thing from the graveyard onto the battlefield is fantastic. You're getting 9 mana worth of creature. And an 11/11 trample really is a big problem for the opponent. So if you can back for more, then that's really devastating. And then what is the other one called? Dang it,
Unbreakable Bond.
Yeah, that one.
Is a lifelink.
Is awesome. Yeah, and then it's 11/11 lifelink trample, which is, again, it basically just says, can you kill this? If not, you lose. And I like it. But again, this isn't the place that I start in the format. I start with Snare Tactician. I start with Memory Leak because they go in more decks and it's less committal. It's just that simple. Because if you can't bring back Titanoth Rex, it's fine, but it really loses a lot of its luster. Our rare is Labyrinth Raptor. This is the black-red 2/2 Menace. It's a nightmare dinosaur. Whenever a creature you control with Menace becomes blocked, defending player sacrifices a creature blocking it, and you can pay black-red to have creatures you control with Menace, including itself, get +1/+0 until end of turn.
Labyrinth Raptor is a strong card. The allied color pairs, black-red's probably the best of them now that I think about it, but the allied color pairs aren't quite as supported as the enemy ones because there's a wedge set. I think the card's fine. It's probably my third pick here after Snare Tactician and Memory Leak, and you can definitely draft a good deck around it, but it's a 2-color card, which obviously you don't want to start on a 2-color card if the pick's at all close.
Mm-hmm. So we're just tacticianing. That's what I would do.
Yeah, I would just take Snare Tactician here.
Which says a lot. Okay, so let's get into the questions here. I don't want to waste any more time. The first question comes from Daniel, who says, by the way, Daniel put a question mark at the end of this, but describe your ideal taco? We're coming in hot, Luis. Like I'm not giving you any breathing room here at all. It's like the hard question.
My favorite taco lifetime is from Taco Sinaloa in Oakland. It's a taco truck now multiple, and it is just 2 corn tortillas that have been griddled alongside carnitas that they take and they crisp up right on the flat top there. They put on the carnitas on the tacos, or on the tortillas rather. They put onions and cilantro and a little bit of salsa, and then you put some lime on. It's not loaded with a lot of stuff. Doesn't have beans or cheese or even avocado. None of that extra stuff. That's my favorite, though. When I make tacos at home, sometimes I'll make that style, but sometimes you go with the all-in where you have whatever protein you want plus cheese and avocado and stuff like that. But that simple taco is, I think, just my lifetime favorite taco.
Yeah, I had a chance to have that one as well as a burrito from there, but those ones I can't get those. I mean, we have some pretty great taco trucks up here, but like that's a next level, when it's, a place is really good when they can do something simple that still just kind of blows your mind, where you're just like, damn, you didn't do anything special to this and it's just unreal,
Yeah, and part of what's brutal is these days those are not like a great delivery option, So
yes, true.
It's something that doesn't hold up quite as well to burritos travel fine, of course. That's one advantage, but I think the tacos don't really hold up as well. So I haven't actually had any tacos except the ones I've been making, which are good. But
they look pretty good on the pictures.
Hold a candle to those guys.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of a carne asada taco, similar to the one that Luis described, keeping it simple, but with some really nicely marinated carne asada. Thanks, Daniel, for the question. Next comes from Ryan, who says, what is a good way to approach sideboarding for games that will go long in a draft? For example, Luris versus Luris draft mirror. What's the best way to play to this advantage? It's a good question, Ryan, and it's one that people don't do enough, right? They don't recognize the different needs of their deck. And a lot of times, my view on sideboarding is there's kind of two levels to it, right? There's the obvious stuff, right? My opponent, they're blue-white flyers. I'm going to bring in Plummet, right? Like that's obvious. They had some bomb enchantment or artifact or whatever. I want my naturalize effect because I'll lose to that card otherwise. Okay, this makes sense, and these ones kind of stand out. Then you can sub those in for whatever your other worst card is, and you're good to go. But these are the more interesting questions where it's more of a deck level kind of matchup level question rather than I need an answer for a specific card question. And this is where you can actually make significant changes to your deck that don't seem like it. A lot of the junky cards that you get in decks in your draft pile can actually come up and be good. Like a good example is, sometimes this isn't the example that Ryan used, but let's say that you're playing a mid-range or maybe a slower deck, and your opponent turns out that they're playing a really aggressive deck. Like you've seen 2 copies of the 3/1 for 1 and a white cat, boot nipper, stuff like that, right? If you have a Whisper Squad, you can sideboard that in if your deck is really slow, and you can just play it and trade it off for one of their 3/1s. And this is not a card that a control deck normally wants, especially like if you only have one. But you can do that. You can take out a clunky 4-drop. Like let's say you've got a 3/3 for 4 or something, that has some abilities or whatever. That's way too slow if your opponent's going to be playing 2-mana 3/1s and the like. So, and 2-mana 2/1s and all that. So instead, you can drastically reduce your curve. You can bring in main servals, stuff like that maybe you're like, this card's kind of junky and I don't really want it. And you can bring those in against those aggressive decks. On the slow ones, you got to be thinking big picture. What's the most card advantage I can get? And you can drastically reduce your defensive speed. So you can take out any of those 2-drops that you put in because, quote, I needed a 2-drop or I didn't want to have nothing to do on turn 2. And you can up your curve significantly. I do that a lot where I'll even add a land and all of a sudden I have 2 more 5-drops and an extra 4-drop and I shave a 3 and a couple of 2s because I know that the early game isn't where that game's going to be won. I just want more raw power later in my deck. And even if they're not great cards, you can do that.
Yeah, I love questions like this because one of the strengths of the Q&A shows, I mean, obviously we get the sweet questions like, what's your favorite taco? But you also open the door for a lot of mini level ups because you said a lot about this, and I actually have a lot to say too. It's a really good question. Basically, look, I like best of one for limited well enough. I play best of one drafts on Arena, and it's fine. You do lose out a bit, and sideboarding, especially in sealed or in draft, can be really, really intricate and interesting because it gives you a lot of opportunities where, look, if you don't sideboard, you still probably have a fine deck, but getting to level 2 of sideboarding can really yield results. Like level 1, like you said, put in plummets or disenchants or whatever. Mm-hmm. But level 2 is stuff like, wow, they're really low to the ground aggro deck. If I get to turn 6 or 7 alive, then I'll feel pretty good about this. Time to put in my 1-mana 0/5 turtles, know? Yep. And what I find the most interesting is siding against other long game decks because especially if you've had a good game or even 2 games, you're going to game 3, you know a lot about their deck. You can I more and more likely to take out a land than add another one because as these games go long, you have plenty of opportunities to draw into your lands. You're not actually mega punished for missing your 3rd land drop like you would be against an aggressive deck. And you can often just, deal with what they're playing or stay alive. And then having, a 16 land deck instead of an 18 land deck can be an advantage in spots like that. I almost hate to say this because it'll lead people down the wrong path. I've sided above 40 if I think the game's going to come to like natural decking before. Sometimes you want it, like if you're 42, this works better in paper actually than on Arena. Because on Arena, your opponent can just look at how many cards you have left. But I've had matches in paper where I presented 42 after board. You don't have to say anything, and we're playing this long game, and my opponent starts counting. They're like, "Oh, you have 20. You have 19 cards left in your deck, and I have 14." And it's like, yeah, I sided up a little extra cards.
Yeah, the single Becker, the double Becker. Yeah, you got to do it sometimes. Also,
this isn't exactly sideboarding, but it's how you approach post-board games. In game one, in the average limited format, if you have a Blood Curdle and they play a 4/4 and you don't have a good blocker, you're often going to Blood Curdle it, right? Because you don't want to take a bunch of damage, and the formats tend to punish you for just leaving creatures in play. But if you've played a game against someone and you know that they have something that's really difficult to deal with, let's say they have a Brokos, the apex of the hunt or whatever, who just keeps coming, or Eternity, I don't know, whichever one that keeps coming back, the Sultai one.
Yep.
If you have an exile removal spell and you now know they have a Brokos, you should try really hard to not use it on anything but Brokos, because you really don't want to end up losing to that card as it hits you over and over again. And against especially in like a matchup that's going to go longer, sometimes you can get hit by a 3/3 or 4/4 like once or twice while you save your removal spell, because you know they've got a 5/5 flyer that you're going to have a really hard time dealing with. So one of the tips that I've seen a lot of people really get a lot of mileage out of, write down every card your opponent plays. Just whenever they play a card, write it down. And that way, when you're sideboarding, you can look and you can see, oh, you know what? They played 3/1 toughness creatures. Maybe I should bring in this ping effect. Or, wow, they really have a lot of high quality removal. Let me bring in like a low quality card, like a Day Squad Marshal's not the best card, but it's actually pretty decent against removal. Or even Garrison Cat. I lost pretty badly to Garrison Cat Reconnaissance Mission once. The curiosity to all your creatures, because I had 2 removal spells in my hand. I had to use both on the cat.
Oh, that's brutal. Oh, that's brutal.
And they probably were main decking the cat or whatever, but it's the sort of thing where if you can get a little value out of a card and they have a lot of removal, or Stormwild Caprador, right? The 3-mana 1/3 that whenever it takes damage gets bigger outside of combat. That's the kind of thing where you look, wow, your opponent has 4 damage-based removal spells. I'm going to bring this card in even if I wasn't main decking it.
Yeah, that's right.
So there's a lot that goes on for sideboarding, and there's a lot of value you can get out of paying attention to what your opponent has and how best to answer it.
Yeah, that Garrison Cat's a great example too. If you're blue-white controlling or whatever, and you can bring that in against the 3/1s deck, it's really a pain for them. It really is. So. Yeah, so keep that in mind, not only to go for the silver bullets, but also the big picture stuff. Next comes from Mike, who says, is there a kind of non-card memorabilia that you're really into? If so, what's the spiciest piece that you have in your collection?
Non-card memorabilia, huh?
Yeah, because you have a sweet Magic collection, but you're not into any other, like, you don't collect sports stuff or...
I mean, I have... Like, we both have some Magic original art. I think that's not a card. I have Goblin Slide. You can kind of see it in the background of all my streams. You've got Manowar. Like, I think that those I like Magic art quite a bit. I do have one piece of memorabilia kind of that means a lot to me. It's one of those like 1 troy ounce of silver coins. It's the buffalo. It's the coin that has a buffalo on one side of a Native American on the other side, and
a nickel.
I always use it for. It's not a nickel. I don't know what it is.
The one so there's two. The one you described is a buffalo nickel, but I think I know the cursed freaking coin you're talking about. That stupid coin. I've lost so much money to that stupid coin.
Yeah, it's a pretty big one. I think it's a silver dollar.
It is at least that thing's huge. Yeah.
Yes, and I got it. A friend gave it to me for good luck before I went to a GP, and then I got second in the GP, and I've always carried it in my wallet forever, basically.
Yeah, and then if you're out with Luis and like it's dinner or hey, this train we all have to take. He'll bring out that stupid coin and flip it, and it's unbeatable. Like, run from it. Just be like, no, I'm cool. We're good. But he knows I can't resist.
I also thought I had lost it, but while cleaning, I actually found it. So I was pretty happy about that.
Yeah. Actually, the real miracle is that you still have it.
Yeah, it's been over a decade now.
Yeah. I do have, I wouldn't say I collect them, but a few things that I do have in my office here that I think are kind of cool are, I found some old magazines that had watch ads in them. So these are like ads from the 60s for some of the watch brands that I like. And they're really funny. Like I have one behind me that's of a watch that I have. And the ad at the time came out in like 1968. It said the wrist computer. It's like it has a stopwatch on it, but it doesn't do any computing. So it is funny to see that because of how weird it's dated. There's another one that I have that I actually got it framed, and it's actually a cigarette ad where if you bought a carton of these cigarettes, you could send in the bottom of it and you could get a watch from my favorite old watch company where instead of it costing $200, it was $88. But there's a really cool story behind it because the watch company was actually struggling pretty bad at the time. Again, this is early 70s now. And they got approached by a major cigarette company called Viceroy at the time. And they were like, hey, we want to, basically they had been marketing these cigarettes towards women. They were like, kind of like the feminine cigarettes at the time. And they wanted to do a complete rechange on the brand, and they wanted them to be like the tough guy cigarettes or whatever. So they went to this watch brand who was known for making watches for race car drivers. Like they have stopwatches on them so you can do your lap times and stuff, because that's how they used to time that kind of stuff. And so they came up with this idea of this cross marketing thing. But the thing that's interesting is that the watch company was this, by comparison, relatively small Swiss watch brand. They could afford to maybe take out one magazine ad with their like entire marketing budget. And this was at the heyday of cigarette power and money. They could do whatever they wanted, and it was all marketing because cigarettes themselves were really cheap to make. So it was just, do you have a Marlboro Man or whatever behind your brand? So they asked them to come along, and they were like, yes, please. And they piggybacked off of basically the biggest marketing pushes that you could get at the time. And it saved the company. It's kind of cool. And I actually have one of the ads from a magazine.
What's the company?
Hoyer. It's called Hoyer. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They're now known as Tag Heuer, but back then they were just Hoyer.
Oh, I know. I recognize Tag Heuer.
Yeah. All right. Next question comes from Farhan, who says, "Hello, Marshall and Luis. As you are both lovers of the cube, do you have any suggestions or tips when building one yourself?" Yeah. The two things that come to mind, although this is a little bit tough, Farhan, because building a cube is a real complicated endeavor that involves, if you're going to do it properly, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of planning and thinking and stuff to really get it balanced. But I do think that the two cool parts that I think about when building a cube is, one is it's okay to build up. You do not have to come in with power and all this crazy stuff. You can start off with the cards you have, create something decent, and then add as you go and kind of refine it and build it. The other thing is that a lot of people think that cube is just either the most powerful cards either ever or that you have available, or the best cards. But I think that it really does serve a good purpose to at least just sketch out what you think, say, the 10 two-color pairs should be doing in your cube. So, for example, you may just throw a bunch of the best cards in there, but then you'll realize that like white-green doesn't do anything. It doesn't have a shtick. It doesn't have any. It's just a bunch of big creatures or efficient stuff. But that the other color pairs might have a better one. So you might want to say, hey, I'm going to make this a token-centric thing, and I'm going to put token-centric cards just for the green-white deck so that they'll have a theme or an idea. And you may want to do that for all the color pairs, and then you can tweak power level afterwards. And that's how I would, at least from a very broad stroke, start off designing a cube.
Yeah, if you're like, well, I don't really want to worry about it, I'm just going to put the best cards of each color in, you just have to know that what you're going to lead, where that's going to lead is that white and black are going to be pretty bad, in specifically. And then a lot of the color combinations that don't involve like green or blue are going to be kind of weak. But that's, first of all, totally fine. Cubes, again, my thoughts on balance are always fun matters most. And you can have an unbalanced cube that's fun, just like every cube, because blue's always the best. Mm-hmm. That said, I wholeheartedly agree with what you said, Marshall, which is find mechanics or themes or pairs that you want to support, and then support them. There's enough powerful cards in Magic or sweet cards or fun cards that the cube doesn't need to be, pick 540 of the best 1,500 cards, which is where a lot of cubes end up. And that's, again, totally fine. But you don't have to do that. You can do whatever you want. And I've seen cubes that, really lean into a black sacrifice theme. And I think that's pretty cool. Yeah. I've seen cubes that have like rebels in it. In fact, one of the cubes that I used to cube with a ton, this is back when cube was almost in its infancy, like early 2000s, had a theme where a lot of cards were altered to add rebel subtypes. So Oblivion Ring was a rebel in that cube, and there was a couple other ones. So rebels could go get these cards, and it made white a lot stronger. And you know what? You get to do that. It's your cube. You can do whatever you want. You can put in companions or change the companion role, and both those things are valid. So just figure out what kind of experience you want and enjoy, and then kind of lean into it.
Yeah, totally. Another question from Fran says, also, what combination of creature types would you design for a monster in Ikoria? And I have to say, they kind of nailed it for me with actually a card we had in our Cracker Pack, the Helica Glider. It's a nightmare squirrel. Just like, I don't know what sick, demented person on the creative team came up with, what we need in this set? A nightmare squirrel, but I appreciate it. And that's what I would have done for sure. Some of the dinosaur combos make me happy too. What about you, Luis? What kind of creature would you want to see?
Honestly, like I'm not super, like, creature types don't like heavily impact me all that much. Mm-hmm. There's not like, oh man, what creature type would you like to see in the next set is not something that really ignites my spark, as it were. But I guess I do enjoy like more humorous things, and like I like it when games don't take themselves that seriously. Mm-hmm. So I think that sort of like going down that road is pretty fun. Like, and I like when you've got like, I don't know, like Nightmare Squirrel is a good example of that, even though that's not exactly where I would have gone first.
It just makes you laugh. You're like, what is this all about? Next question comes from David, who says, how many players do you feel can force cycling and have all of them be solid decks? I seem to find that 3 players can be playing it and they all have a solid list. Does this scare you in the long-term health of the format? So, David, this is interesting, but I actually had a discussion with Ryan Spain about this, who went on and actually ran the numbers. He actually counted out, like he put the commons and uncommons into tiers, and then calculated the frequency with which those tiers were opened. And his findings were basically that it supports 2 fully fleshed out, like you would call good cycling decks. Not amazing, like not the ones that are absurd, but it fully supports 2. And he also factored in 1 mana cyclers and 0 and 2 mana cyclers in separate groups, but as keys to the puzzle as well. Yeah. And it really does support 2. His hunch was that it could also do 3, but that either one would be worse or all 3 would be, well, I guess all 3 would be worse probably by default, but that it would be 3 worse versions, but that they would be functional, but probably the kind that you could beat and not feel like, okay, I'm just screwed, like I can't ever win or whatever. So you're pretty close on that one, David. There can be 3, but you do see a noticeable drop off where they only get 1 to 3 of the tier 1 uncommon or uncommons, and like they might get like a Zenith Flare and a Valiant Rescuer or something, and then they don't have any of the other great uncommons, and then the number of premium payoffs at common will go down a little bit too. Snare Tactician, of course, is kind of the one that jumps to mind the most, but he even had Marmoset in that list as well, with cards like Drannith Healer being in the tier 2, but obviously it's also a 1 mana cycler, so it's kind of a cross card. But at any rate, you're pretty close, David. It is 2 very solidly and 3 possible. 4, if 4 people are drafting it, then you've got people really struggling to make a good deck.
That sounds right.
Next comes from Jackson, who says, what are you guys most looking forward to after quarantine is over? This has been weird because it's actually changed for me as the time has gone by. The number one thing that has been kind of in the back of my head from just I miss it standpoint is basketball, like period. I just, it's such a release for me, both just like it just hits everything that I like. There's strategy, there's athleticism, there's competitiveness, or, you know, you're competing against somebody. Then there's also just the health stuff. Like, you know, it's my main form of exercise. It reduces stress. It's got all those things. So that's one that comes to mind first. But I'll tell you what, man, as time has gone by and I've recognized like the effect that not hanging out with people and other people and stuff like that has had on me, that's definitely number one. I did a Zoom call with some of my guys from coverage. I had like a work Zoom call, and it was just like, oh my God, I feel better like almost immediately, you know, talking to people and kind of feeling like I'm in some sort of group or something. And that's the part that I definitely miss the most now. Like, I just feel like it's like had a bad effect on me or something. It's not just like, I wish I could get some hoops going. It's like, man, this is something that I need in my life and don't have. So I'm looking forward to that the most. What about you, Luis?
For me, honestly, I need a vacation, man.
Yeah, you've been going so hard since quarantine. Because you guys have to realize it at home that, like, you know, Luis has a important role, like, for example, at Channel Fireball. And, you know, when things get thrown at a business like this, they are forced to react, right? If you do not react, your business will go under. I mean, during times like this, when the income gets reduced to almost zero, if you don't have a plan and you don't execute it, and even if you do, you might still be in trouble because it's pretty rough times right now. But, you know, that meant that everybody behind the scenes at Channel Fireball, and this also extended, by the way, to Wizards of the Coast, had to scramble. I mean, if you look back at the last 3 months and look at the changes to the businesses and stuff that have happened, it's been incredible. And, you know, Luis is a stakeholder in that. He's somebody who is implementing these things and making these decisions and in these meetings. And I don't know how you're still going, dude, because you have been going nonstop for a really long time.
I will say I took a load off kind of after the launch of Pro was dialed back to what a reasonable level for sure. Uh-huh. But yeah, I could. The thing is, I don't know when the next time we'll be able to get on an airplane is. I can't imagine it's particularly soon, but I look forward to when I can get on an airplane, you know, whether it's to go see friends and family, whether it's to go to a tournament where I get to see some of those folks, or if it's just straight up go on a vacation of some kind. But that sounds like it would be really fun.
Mm-hmm. What was your most embarrassing public play mistake of all time? Did you get tilted or hold it together? You've been on camera a lot over your career.
Yeah. I've done some bad ones. I will say I'm not particularly embarrassed by them. Like, I've made embarrassing mistakes in the sense of like, wow, that's an embarrassing mistake. But me myself, I'm not particularly embarrassed by them. Like, I don't know. I've played long enough that I know I'm going to screw up a lot. That just kind of comes with the territory. I think when I was playing the Twitch Rivals tournament and decked myself with Expansion Explosion, that was pretty good. I enjoyed that.
That's a good one.
And then the other one that it was really bad was when I slaughter pacted my own creature in response to a Searing Blaze to try to stop the Searing Blaze.
Oh, but it targets you too? Or
the problem is it doesn't stop the Searing Blaze, so then I still had to pay for Slaughter Pact. Like, I did not win that game, and that was a feature match at a Grand Prix. So, yeah, I mean, I say that, like, I'm actually, like, not super likely to make I'm not first on the list of pros that make, like, big boneheaded mistakes. Like, you know, that's not a huge part of my range, but definitely happens. And when it does, I just kind of live with it. It doesn't really bother me, to be honest. I
it's funny for me. When I have a way kind of to categorize that stuff too, similar to what you said, where like sometimes I make a boneheaded mistake, but it's because I didn't understand the card or read the card, or, you know, it's like one of those things. And when that happens, I feel silly, but I'm also just like, I don't know, that's going to continue to happen. Like, you know, it turns out reading and fully understanding how every card works is something that's actually quite difficult in Magic. And it's something that takes a while to kind of absorb, especially when you get up into the rares and stuff. But I mean, I've had plenty of, you know, I keep my videos where I make stupid mistakes. And so you can find plenty of those there. This one also comes from Mike was busy in the comments. What's your favorite paper basic land?
So I don't know that I have like a full-on favorite. Like the Dark Beta Island is obviously very high on my list. I really do like playing those. But I also like the original Arena ones that have like the serpent going throughout all of them. Mm-hmm. Those are pretty strong. And I like the APAC lands too. So I kind of alternate kind of based on my mood, usually just among those three though.
Yeah, my favorite is the Beta Island B. It's the one that it's the lighter colored, like it just looks like a green island on a blue thing. That's the one that I have. Beta lands are my favorite, or alpha, whatever. Beta lands are my favorite for a combination of their simplicity, but also nostalgia. And then, I mean, I know it's like played out or whatever, but the Guru lands, if you've never seen a Guru land in person, they are unreal. Like they're gorgeous on screen, but they have a presence with the printing. I don't know if they're darker printed or something, but I managed to get my hands on one of each of them over the course of the past like 6 years or something. I found them at GPs. I got one from CFB, and I just wanted to own one of each, and they are stunning. I mean, truly, like they are they just have a different presence about them in real life. It's hard to explain. I hope you can get your hands on one and see it at some point though. Okay, so Ryan, all right. So he says, this is pretty troll mode, LOL. But at least maybe show the questions to Luis. Luis, I'm going to let you answer this however you want. He says, Luis, as vice president of marketing for channelfireball.com, have you calculated the return on advertising for CFB's sponsorship of the Limited Resources podcast? If so, how does it stack up? Oh, man. So, he's just putting us right on the spot. That's aggro.
Well, so advertising on LR is not is easily trackable for ROAS as something like Google or Facebook ads, which kind of built into the campaign is you actually just see the ROAS as you're doing it, and you decide whether to put more money in. And then at past a point, sometimes you start getting diminishing returns, and that's always tricky because you're like, oh, this ad started out at like kind of like a 16x. This is going great. The product ad, everything is really hitting with people. Mm-hmm. But as you continue, you kind of burn through the audience that's the best fit for it, and it gets lower. And then at some point, you're like, okay, we've spent enough money on this campaign. It's not. We're starting to see diminishing returns, so we should, switch the copy or switch what we're offering or whatever. Mm-hmm. But something like sponsoring LR or like a streamer or something like that, that's not. It's not as easy to track because what we're getting out of that is a lot of organic results where people are listening, and this that's part of why I say, hey, the show is brought to you by Channel Fireball, so listeners will hopefully associate Channel Fireball with a good place to go because you did vouch for it. That's part of what you pay a streamer or a podcaster or a spokesperson for is you're partially paying for their credibility, right? Mm-hmm. Because the people who people trust tend not to recommend products that are poor, because if you did, you would lose credibility, and there's a cost to that too, right? And so it's a little trickier using discount codes like if you have a code for a streamer that can help us track things too. But overall, we like what LR stands for. We like the reach it has, and we believe that it is good to sponsor the podcast, even if it's hard for us to know exactly because, folks who order from CFB rarely say, hey, I heard about you guys on LR, though that has happened. And that actually carries some weight, too, because for every person who does that, we can assume there's many, many, many people who don't. But overall, we're satisfied with the arrangement. And, it's something that I think that advertising and marketing in general can be difficult. The more digital it is, the easier it is to track. But companies don't really know what the ROAS is on a billboard necessarily, but they have to, or even a TV advertisement. But clearly there's something there because a lot of the companies are successful, spend a lot of money on advertising. So that was a serious answer to what I assume was not a very serious question.
Yeah, it is interesting too, because to flip it, from the other side of the equation, I've always viewed when I partner up websites and stuff as partnerships, right? Like I don't, like I'm viewing it as it's not just a transactional thing. And I mean, the audience, I think they know that I'm very picky, right? Like, I had one other sponsor for the show before CFB, and it was another good website. It was Card Kingdom. And, I'm really picky about the sites that I would partner with. There's only a few, that I trust and that I know, I can send my listeners to, and that they'll be taken care of, in a good way. And, so it is interesting because you get to see things kind of from both sides. I have to think about who could serve my audience the best. Right. And so that's, a big part of the equation too, when it comes to this stuff. So yeah, it is interesting because it's not always just about, bottom line numbers. It's also about, association, so, I'm proud to be associated with Channel Fireball. Right. And if I wasn't, then I wouldn't be with you guys anymore.
Right. And I can speak to the other side of the equation because, I'm a streamer and, I get approached by various companies and or brands. And, I have on very rare occasions chosen to work with them. For example, stream was sponsored by Madrina's Coffee Company for quite some time. And it's because I really liked their product. I, got to know them at TwitchCon, and that's kind of where that went. But I will tell you, I've been approached by a lot of different games or brands to do something. And a lot of times I look at it and I'm like, this just wouldn't ring true to me. Like this isn't something I'm interested in doing. I don't want to promote a game I haven't played and I'm not realistically going to play on my stream because I don't feel that doesn't really sit well with me. That being said, if Wendy's came to either of us and offered us $20,000 a month to be sponsored by Wendy's, let me tell you, those Baconators are great.
Yeah, it is interesting because I do wonder where that line is sometimes because LR gets approached all the time.
Everyone will sell out.
Yeah, it's interesting because because we get approached a lot, LR does too, to promote stuff like that because these marketing firms can be really sloppy. They're just like, we've got a couple of $1,000 to throw at somebody.
Hello, I would like to arrange for sponsorship of your brackets podcast.
Right, exactly. That is. It's literally like that. Hello, friend. And it's like, what, and it's just not real things behind it. But these are actually actual offers that you can take. But it's for games that are obscure. And what they're going off of is the fact that and this is something that comes up a lot too. And I know this is a big tangent, but it's something that I like to talk about on these times when we're not in like an in-depth strategic topic with, which is, I'm always, when we first started doing the show, and then it's also just fits like Luis and my style as well. But, we really do try to keep the overhead on the listener down. Like we want to keep the show going. So talking about Channel Fireball makes sense. Talking about the Patreon makes sense. And we try not to do, 8 minutes of talking about that stuff at the beginning of the show, but it's an important piece of the puzzle for us to make sure that the show exists and continues to go. But, there are a lot of other things that you'll hear on a lot of podcasts that we don't do, and it's on purpose. Like, for example, we don't beg you for ratings in the iTunes store. And if you listen to a lot of podcasts, they will. And they'll say, please leave us a rating in the iTunes store, blah, blah. It helps so much, blah, blah, blah. And you know what? The truth is I get it. I know why they're doing it. Because they're right. When you get those ratings, it actually bumps you up higher on your rankings in whatever, space you're in. Like we're in like games and other hobbies or something like that is the area where limited resources falls. And we've been really lucky. I mean, we've been number one there numerous times, which I don't even check it very often, but it does go up and it's always really cool to see that. But that's without us asking you for reviews on there. And the reason for that is I just view it as a burden. I see it as, by the way, I approach Twitter the same way, is that there are people you follow who will throw anything at you that they see. Hey, check this out. Hey, go look at this. Hey, go, this thing, go do this for me. I want this, like and subscribe, smash that like button. People just asking. And again, I get it. I'm not condemning people who do that, but you have to choose.
To be clear, if you're listening and you like LR, you really should review LR and give us a good review.
Listen, Luis, by the way, is a marketing guy these days. He knows what ROAS means. So you take that with a grain of salt. But for us, I had to make a decision early, both with Twitter and with the show and stuff about, well, what kind of a thing what are the things that bother me about when I watch content? And it's when I am being told these stupid hoops that I want to jump through to make my content creator's life better. And I totally, YouTube's a great place where you see this too. It's always the same stuff. It's the, hey guys, and then the make sure you like and subscribe, hit the bell icon, comment,
that can be tough, or really any content creation, but YouTube stands out because I think it's got a lot more of this aspect of here's the ways that you can optimize your channel, your audience, your content. And if you go down that road, it can actually kind of drive you crazy. I don't blame people who look like, the professor, for example. It's his job. Like YouTube is his number one job. He does a lot of awesome things, but YouTube is his like bread and butter. And I've seen him express frustration because like part of his job is to do his best to keep up with the different YouTube trends and, to be researching stuff like, hey, what kind of titles are the best? What's the best time of day to upload a video? All these things matter. What kind of images do you use on the splash screen? Like all of that stuff really can impact things. And YouTube in particular is very good about telling you about those things. You upload a YouTube video and it's like 45 minutes later, hey, this video is doing better than normal, and stuff like that. And I know you and I know us, and like that's the kind of thing that we can really fall deeply into that. Yes. So the best thing I think for us is to not try to optimize every facet of our life. Because look, we do try to do a lot of these things the right way and figure out the best way to do them. But if you apply that to everything, at some point it's just going to be too much.
That's right. And what I realized early on with all of this stuff was that time I spent doing that was time that I wasn't spending on the content. And what I realized is there's a lot of channels that are very successful on YouTube and a lot of podcasts and stuff that don't play that game. And again, I'm with you. I understand why Professor does it. And I understand why people who do that I understand the reasoning behind it, but for me, I think it's flawed. I think that the thing that overcomes all of those things, the thing that gets you to the next level is not that. I think you can make improvements. You can see a little bit better viewership, a little bit better things. And, I do try to do some of the basics of that stuff too. It's not like I do zero, but I never check analytics on YouTube. I never check analytics on all that stuff because it drives me nuts. I'll just keep checking it and I'll go, well, what if I do this and what if I do that? And next thing you know, I'm thinking about all this stuff and it's like I could have been writing, show topics that were really good or talking to you or playing Magic so that I know more about what's going on in the format, that kind of stuff. So anyway, this is, of course, not in relation to Ryan's question, but it is something that I like to check in with the listeners with every once in a while, just to sort of explain our philosophy and why you hear things and don't hear things that are on here, because I basically try to make the show about the listener rather than about us. So if I beg you for comments on a thing, it's so disingenuous to watch a YouTube video and they go, guys, what do you think about this topic? Let me know in the comment section below. It's like the reason they are doing that is because if you get more comments, then your engagement goes up and they get higher placement in the algorithm. They don't care what you think about the topic. That's not why they're asking you for that. And I'm just like, I don't want to have that I don't want that to be the relationship with our audience, So at any rate, he has another question.
Look, all I've got to say is just mash that like and subscribe button. That's
See, Luis and I are a balanced pair.
You take the high road, I'll take the low road. We'll cover all the roads.
Yeah, we'll get right in the middle. It is true though, because there are times when I'm a little too stern on that, and Luis will say, "Look, this isn't that big. This isn't that, and we should do this." And then I'll go along with it because he understands the marketing stuff much better than I do. So I do trust his opinion and try to listen when it makes sense. But philosophically, trying to keep it real here. Also from Ryan.
Until we land that Wendy's sponsorship. At
least.
Well,
so if we start shilling for Baconators, then you'll know that they hit a very high number. And we'll try to get free Baconators for everybody or whatever. Ryan says, Marshall, Oko Thief of Crowns was one of the most impactful cards in recent memory. It wasn't just a limited bomb. It was so strong it had to be banned from a different format every week for about a month straight. Given that, are you willing to admit that you were wrong about who is the greatest thief in the multiverse? That was ad copy I was reading. Speaking of ad copy, by the way, that was not me, not my claim, Ryan, and you dang well know it. Nikolai Bolas, hey Nikolai, speaking of YouTube, says, if you could tell yourself from 10 years ago one thing, what would it be? Ooh, this is interesting. I think that sort of dovetailing off of what we were just talking about, because that was the time when I was starting the podcast. I would tell myself to trust my gut, because that was a time frame when I was figuring out a lot of the stuff that we just talked about. And most of it, not all, but I've had to make course corrections and stuff like that. But most of my gut instinct on this stuff was right, particularly about what I was talking about before with I'm going to put a bunch of time on this algorithm or massaging this stuff. That might get me 5%. But if I make just a great show, just a show that is useful for the audience and that people want, that could get me 50% growth, right? Like it's just
when are you going to do that?
I did it then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Now we're kind of, we've changed actually quite a bit of stuff over the last few years. It's just slow, more incremental stuff. But that's what I would tell myself, at least as far as that goes. I would just say, hey, you're on a good path here. Stay on it and it'll work out okay for you. What about you, Luis? What would you tell yourself?
I think the lesson I'd tell myself from 10 or even 20 years ago, when I was a kid or whatever, is you can be more assertive and ask for what you want, and that cuts across work, personal relationships, really just everything. Where, look, I try not to be, a pushy jerk or whatever. I tend to think I'm not, but there's a really far difference between that and being confident and standing up for yourself. And again, like asking for, like when someone, how many times, Marshall, when someone asks you, hey, what would a quote be to do this thing? You try to you talk yourself down to the lowest number you'd accept. Yes. Right.
Yeah. That's my natural.
That's your signature move, actually.
Yeah,
I know that we've talked about that.
Until you came along.
Well, exactly. And that's
you taught me how to negotiate better.
Because when it comes down to it, I think asking for more and valuing yourself is a totally fine thing to do. Look, if you go crazy and let's say someone asks you for something and you're like, for this amount of work and this thing, whatever it is, I would, and this comes up for me and Marshall a little bit more just than the average person, because we do a lot of contract work where there's just no set in stone rate. And you're like, well, I would definitely do this for 500. Instead, I'm going to ask for 1,500. And if they say, hey, that's outside our budget, then maybe you would do it for 500 or 1,000, but you're still, all right. And sometimes they just snap yes. And you just wonder, man, could I have asked for more? Because at the end of the day, what your time is worth is really what you negotiated for. And look, I'm not advocating you go out here and someone asks you for something that you do for $500 and you say $5,000, because if you come in too hot, they're going to be like, whoa, sorry, our expectations are pretty different. We're going to go a different way. But many, many times, we've left a lot on the table by not asking for more, and, or the fear of rejection. And this kind of comes up when it comes to dating, for example, fear of rejection really stifled me a lot when I was much younger. And that is not, that something I'm not particularly happy about. Or when you need to have maybe a tough conversation with a friend of yours or a family member, it can be easy to avoid that conflict. But I don't consider myself a particularly conflict avoidant person at this point, even though I used to very much be. And I think that's something that has generally made my life better, is just being more clear about what I want. And and I'm not an unreasonable person. I can compromise, but if you never ask, you're gonna get a lot less than if you asked. And I think that's something, trying to find the right balance that works for you is obviously different for every person. But that's something I wish I knew more about when I was younger.
Yeah. Jaeger says, hey guys, now that the dust is settled, how's your experience been with Luca, Coppercoat, Outcast, and Narset of the Ancient Way? How highly are you picking them? Pack one, pick one. Well, Narset, I pack one, pick one, and I windmill it. That card's been really good for me. Luca, a little less so, but I'd probably still pack one, pick one it.
Luca asks you to have a very creature-dense deck where you just start spamming the +1. The biggest problem I've had with Luca is that it actually kind of decks you.
Yes.
Because you're just every +1's 3 cards, and I have run into that issue before. But they're both cards I would tend to take early. Trying to think if let's say the line of Fire Prophecy, where are you at with Fire Prophecy versus these two cards? I think I'm taking Fire Prophecy over Narset, but I might take Luca over Fire Prophecy because it's still a monocolored card and pretty strong. Yeah,
I would take both Planeswalkers over Fire Prophecy at this point. Luca to me has been a very ultimate centric card. U ++- or ++ ultimate is really strong, and you don't deck yourself that way. And then Narset, I'm just willing to work to make Narset work. It's really hard not to get at least a 2 for 1 out of
Narset.
Narset.
Pretty good in this set too.
Yeah. You get a Farfinder in there into Narset. You've already got a blocker. You kill whatever creature they had by discarding something, and then you're gaining life plus and then minus again. So within the 3 turns, the turn you cast it, the next turn, the turn after.
I would take Narset over Fire Prophecy, I think.
Yeah. Next comes from Nicholas, who says, "Hey, Luis and Marshall, do you have some advice on how to draft blue-green mutate? It's my favorite archetype in Ikoria, but I find myself losing pretty badly when I draft it." Well, you're in kind of a tough spot here, Nicholas. It is not one of the better archetypes in the format, which is why you find yourself losing. Now, the fact that it's your favorite should factor in a little bit to how how you're drafting and such. And it does have some powerful options, but when I've drafted it, I found that it leans too hard on opening premium uncommons for it, like the Gnarlid or whatever it's called, and the Pouncing Shore Shark and Archipelagore and stuff like that to kind of, do the really powerful mid-range to high-range stuff. Yeah, sure. You can have some Frost Lynxes and some Dreamtail Herons and, a few dirtily green creatures to put them on and stuff. And that can be an okay thing. You even get Capture Sphere and the green fight card or punch card. But, yeah, I don't know. It feels like this would be in the lower half of archetypes for me if I were to rank them right now.
I think the biggest thing for Mutate is Mutate's a pretty big tempo hit if your creature gets dealt with. So I really value Essence Symbiote and Frost Lynx in blue-green because both those cards, the life gain off the Symbiote and the fact that it's cheap, and then Frost Lynx, of course, slowing down your opponent's attacks, really do help where if you mutate onto them and then your opponent deals with it, you're often not left in too bad of a spot. So more on those and concentrate fewer on like the Dreamtail Herons, which are good payoffs, but you need more of the lower end stuff to really make the deck work.
That's right. Jake says, "Hey guys, I'm having trouble figuring out how to get into the cycling deck besides opening Zenith Flare. The walkthrough draft was definitely helpful, but can you go over what signals to look for? Do you need to take payoffs first, or do 1-mana cyclers wheeling present enough of a signal for you to dive in? Thanks a bunch." No, you need the payoffs, Jake. The 1-mana cyclers, if they wheel, is a nice bonus, but there really are so many of them in the format that they do come around, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the cycling deck is open. To me, it's an arms race to see who can get the payoffs the quickest, because once you have critical mass of those, then you can shift your focus to either premium payoffs or 1-mana cyclers. So yeah, the bar for me, like if I see a Dran Stinger or a Prickly Marmoset, a little bit later in the pack, it raises my eyebrows, but it doesn't mean I'm in. Snare Tactician, yes. Like that to me is like open signal. Obviously, cards like Zenith Flare going later are just a wide open green light that it's open. But, to me, the bar is like a Snare Tactician. That's where if I see that card 5th, 6th pack, I do take it as a signal. And those are, that's what you want to be looking for. Again, if I see a Dran Stinger and then another Dran Stinger and then a Prickly Marmoset in picks 4, 5, and 6, okay, that's also added up to enough of a signal.
Yeah, I agree that Snare Tactician is certainly the most loud thing, discounting the uncommons. If you get a 5th pick Flourishing Fox, just run for the hills, grab it and go with it. The other thing I will do is I kind of aggressively take 1-mana cyclers in pack 1. And part of it is that if you end up, green-black and you have Memory Leak, that's just a really good card. But part of it is if I have 3 or 4 1-mana cyclers, I'm still positioned where maybe in pack 2 I can move into cycling depending on where I was in pack 1, especially if I'm either red or white. Like imagine if you kick off the draft with like a Fire Prophecy and then you pick up let's say like I would take a Drannith Stinger second, maybe a Farfinder third, something like that. There, if I see like a Frostveil Ambush, I'm pretty likely to take it, and then maybe I'll end up in red-green, or maybe I'll end up in red-blue spells. Who knows? But then in pack 2, if I have a couple 1-mana cyclers, and even if I don't have any cycling payoffs and I open a Zenith Flare, I'm in position. If I open something a little weaker, like a Fox or Reptilian Reflection, I'm not quite as gung-ho about it. But you also keep yourself open, so when you do get the 7th pick Snare Tactician, which certainly even happens these days, you can be well poised for that. Or if you pick up a couple Marmosets or something like that.
Okay. Keldon says, "Hi, Marshall and Luis. I recently drafted a Luris cycling deck, Zenith Flare, 5 Flourishing Foxes, and 12 1-mana cyclers. It's probably the most powerful deck I've ever drafted outside of Cube. Do you ever pay attention to when you end up in an all-timer A+ type deck? And if so, do any come to mind?
I do remember I drafted back-to-back monocolor aggro decks at PT San Diego. This is in triple Zendikar World Wake, where aggro was pretty strong, though not quite as strong as triple Zendikar. But I drafted a mono black deck and a mono green deck that both had like multiple 1-drops. The green deck had Eldrazi Monument, and both those decks were insane. And I remember Benes getting so mad because this is back when team drafts existed, and we did a lot of team drafts. These are like 3-on-3 team drafts. For pride, among other things. For pride
that you can spend at the mall, yeah.
Yeah. And we did a lot of these, and I would always draft these just monstrosities. I remember at one point arguing that I should be able to play what was that card? What was the 4-mana 6/6 flying trample, but you couldn't win the game if you had it in play? The 2 black 6/6
the
flying.
demon, yeah, Desecration Demon. Is that what it was?
No, it wasn't Desecration Demon, but it was the demon that basically was a Platinum Angel for your opponent, but it was a 4-mana 6/6 flying trample, so you got a pretty good deal. And I remember trying to play it in a deck and Ben like explaining the convoluted ways I had to remove it, and Ben's like when I started talking about, well, if they play a Core Skyfisher, which bounces a permanent, I can clone it to bounce my own permanent. At that point, he cut me off and wouldn't let me play it. He actually physically took it away from me. So this is the kind of stuff I'm up to. And then in the PT, I just draft these 2 great aggro decks and then 6 other drafts. And Ben got so mad. He's like, where was this? Why didn't you play this when we had something on the line? So those definitely came to mind for me.
Oh, that is great. What is that stupid card called? Now I can't remember.
Yeah, it was from World Wake. It was an exciting card, but also a bust. It didn't end up getting anywhere.
Yeah, because Desecration Demon was the one that has you. They can sack creatures and tap it and give it counters, right? Okay, yeah. Bonus question: what Ikoria card do you most want to see in Vintage Cube? The one that came to mind, I can't remember the name of it, is the blue-green legend.
Oh, Kinan, Bonder Prodigy?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm not even joking. I think it'd be fun to see Lurrus in Vintage Cube. Like, I think that some of the companions could be fun, and if they end up being too nuts, you just take them out after one rotation. But I'm like totally in to try to draft like a sacrificed Lurrus deck or with a really low curve or something like that. That sounds pretty sweet.
That does sound sweet. Next one, another one from Mike. Wow, Mike is a busy boy. If you could Thanos snap one card out of the history of existence, which card would it be?
Jeez.
I know which one I would do for you.
What would that be?
Bonfire of the Damned.
Oh, yeah, that would be pretty good.
We could get some Back to the Future stuff going where we change your whole history.
It's so tough because there's so many cards printed in the last 2 years that have been really bad for Magic.
Seriously, there really have.
Really.
There really have been.
I would I kind of want to say Oko because Oko, I think, really took away a lot of the fun and excitement of a new set very quickly. Like Eldraine just, in a lot of ways was just unsatisfying, and it ruined a bunch of tournaments that I had to play in. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't hate that, but like I could see arguments for Astrolabe is kind of messing up Eternal formats pretty badly. Hogak definitely had an impact. Companions, I guess if I could do all 10 companions, maybe, but maybe they're about to take some good action on Monday, so maybe that wouldn't be necessary.
What do you think would happen if we Thanos snapped Black Lotus away? Would Magic be like 15%? As big
Magic
as it is now?
Magic would be much, much worse, yeah, I think.
The lore of that kind of thing.
So we talked about this at length on our Alpha set review with TBS. But despite any of the things that we thought were mistakes in Alpha, I don't think any of us were in for any sort of reroll. Like Magic has been astoundingly popular, one of the most popular games of all time by a lot. And changing any ingredient on the first set seems like a huge error because there's so much uncertainty there. But do I think Magic would be more successful if you were able to just not print Oko and Thorn of Eldraine or not print the 10 companions? Like, yeah, I actually do.
Yeah, for sure. Jordan says, been making breakfast burritos per Luis's suggestion, and they've been amazing. My girlfriend wants me to make them with mango, pico, and sweet potato along with the classic ingredients. Is that crazy?
No, that's not crazy. That I think that would work out pretty nicely. Like I will say that I think mango salsa goes best with like pork or fish than it does anything a little more savory. But I think that you could do mango pico and sweet potatoes for a slightly sweeter breakfast burrito, and it would be quite good.
Yeah, I feel like that's right up your alley. Like all of those things. Next question comes from Ben, who says, I feel like the past several formats have had a larger learning curve than previous formats. In other words, I lose lots early in the format, except for the pre-release for some reason. And by the way, the reason, Ben, is because many, many, many more players play pre-releases that don't normally play events, so you're facing lower quality competition. Then I get back to my normal after a few weeks. Is there something to this? Or is my recent foray into MTGO to blame as opposed to playing at the local game store? These have been complicated formats. That could have something to do with it. But if you're trying to compare Magic Online play to local game store play, it is night and day. The competition on Magic Online is much stronger than at the local.
That'd be the first thing I would think of. Like now that especially now that there's human drafts on Arena, the only people on Magic Online are just the inveterate grinders who are, old dogs that don't want to learn new tricks. I'm one of them. And, I still draft on Magic Online. I actually do draft on Arena because I also find it nice. Actually, one of my main problems with Arena is just such a low, like my laptop can't run it. It's just, it's a beast of a program at this point.
Yeah.
But yes, if you're going to play on Magic Online, the average skill level you'll face is quite a bit higher than your local game shop. It's not.
That's probably
that would be where I would look. But you know what? That's good training. You do that, and if you do find yourself starting to have your win rate creep back up after you've taken some beatings, that's perfect. Like that's optimal training right there.
That is what you want, Ben. Keep it up. Another one from Mike. Would you rather have Indestructible or Flying in real life?
Oh, I think I'd rather have Indestructible.
Me too.
Indestructible, it's not even close because first, Indestructible will save you if you got in a car accident or a piano falls on you when you're walking down the street, and that's awesome, saved your life. If you're flying, within like a couple days you're just locked up in some facility as the government's trying to figure out how you get to fly. Seriously.
Or it's funny how opposite these are as well, because your risk of injury if you could fly would be so much higher.
Doesn't have to be so high.
Yeah. Also, I'm assuming that we're talking about flying in the sense that it takes about as much effort as like jogging or something would, where I can't just be like, hey, I'm in Paris,
I assume it's like Superman flying where you're just like, whoosh, and that's it.
So I could like come hang out with you, assuming no COVID stuff, like without much issue?
No, I would. I assume you can't fly like straight up like Superman, like 1,000 miles an hour or whatever. But
okay.
I think
bird-like flight. Yeah, I would take Indestructible.
I think Indestructible as well.
Man, I could just like play basketball as hard as I wanted and never worry. That'd be sweet. Let's see. Next one comes from Brett, who says, from a game design perspective, I've always wondered how designers approach balancing a game's mechanics against feel-bads. For example, counter magic is an integral and essential mechanic to Magic, but can often be one of the most frustrating feel-bads when you're on the receiving end. That is interesting. What about there's land destruction. There's a lot of stuff that are, kind of part of the game, but really does, like, new players hate counter spells. They hate it when you counter their stuff.
So it's a complicated question. But in general, like, feel bads are actually a really important thing to keep an eye on in a lot of different ways. And one of the reasons counter spells tend to be toned down, especially over the last couple of years, is because of how frustrating they are. And here's an example. If you cast a dragon and your opponent kills it in a turn of Doomblade versus you casting a dragon and your opponent casting a counterspell, functionally it's the same, right? They spent, you spent a bunch of mana, they spent however much their thing cost, both cards are in the graveyard. But if you ask people, the counterspell experience is much worse. And that's valuable to know because, look, counterspells can be important to balance, and I think that there's some threats that, like, it's really good to be able to negate, their 7 mana and the game threat as a balancing mechanism. But in general, you see counterspells powered down in Standard for that reason. Like, there have been brief periods of time over the last couple months where something like blue-green flash or Is It Flash has been playable, right?
Yeah.
I think that's generally not great. Those decks are pretty unfun to play against. And play patterns and how fun things are really does matter. Yeah, and one of the big breakthroughs for Magic design, which I think they've kind of gone away from this a bit, is make the cool looking cards also good. It used to be that, suckers played Sheep and Dragons, even though those were the cool cards, and the people in the know played Force Spikes and Doomblades and Factor Fictions. And then Baneslayer came along. This is the quintessential example where Baneslayer not only looks cool, it was also really good for a while. Like, it was just a good card. You were smart for putting it in your deck. And it's good to line those things up because you want to reward people's intuition. It's kind of like, to go to like UI design. If you notice users constantly doing a thing wrong, maybe instead of making that the wrong thing to do, just change whatever you're doing so that's then the right thing to do.
Yes.
That's
actually a little life hack that I've adopted as well when it comes to like where my stuff is, like where I put something, especially if it's something I don't use. I find that for whatever reason, my brain thinks of a place associated with the thing, even if sometimes it's a little like weird and it would be more organized if I put it somewhere else. I just finally stopped putting it where it's supposed to go and put it where my brain thinks it is. And then I just find it there. And I just trust that the first place I think of is where it's going to be, even if it's not really where it belongs or whatever. It's the same thing, right? It's like brains are weird and sometimes it's better to just lean into it than to try to fight it the whole time,
Oh, totally. You should not be fighting the people you're designing a game or a teapot for. Like right. you should be harnessing that. And it's not to say that, I've talked about this before, but it's not to say that you shouldn't have any frustration and it should all be smooth sailing. I think, when you're talking about tea kettle design, there should be no frustration. Ideally, that's as seamless as that can be. But for games, I think frustration can be a good part of it. You just have to be really careful about how you harness and balance that.
That's right. All right, one more question here before we have to go. And once again, Luis, there's so many more. Anyway, we'll have to figure this out. This one comes from Michelle, who says, "Hi, Marshall and Luis. Thanks for the great show. I have a question about innate skills and if you think that really good Magic players are born with certain traits or characteristics. I ask because while I love the game and have gotten better thanks to LR, I feel like I'm just not cut out to be a really good Magic player, just an advanced beginner. Some innate Magic skills that I see being good at in math, that's not me. Having good memory, mine is terrible. Being able to multitask, I'm a disaster at juggling lots of information or doing many things at once. And finally, have special intelligence, nix that one too. What I do have is the ability to self-scrutinize and learn from my mistakes. I never leave a draft blaming bad luck, but rather look to see where I can improve. That's the best thing I have going for me, I guess. Oh, and I also love goblins and dragons. My question for you is, what other innate skills do you think make a good Magic player? Maybe I have some of them and I don't even know it. And also, what do you think a person can do to compensate who doesn't have some of the skills I mentioned, like spatial intelligence or a good memory? Ooh, this is a great question. In fact, I covered a lot of this in the special edition of LR that I did a couple of years back now. That is the post-produced one, the one that I did with Ben S. and Huey. And I can put a link to that episode, Michelle, so you can listen to it. But I did want your thoughts on this, Luis. Because I've seen a lot of Magic players who didn't think that they would ever be good get good. Through process. Sure, maybe it didn't come as easily to them, but they worked hard and they actually did get really good.
So I think the number one trait that I can associate with all the elite players, the world-class players that I know, is an obsession with Magic. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I think that is almost a requirement to be at the top of your field in any field is, maybe obsession's not, it can be too strong a word, but honestly, I really do think that drive to be the best and to learn and to study and to spend so much of your waking moments thinking about it, whether you're actively playing or not. The 10,000 hour rule exists for a reason, right? And this isn't like a hard and fast rule, but it's kind of an observation that it takes in a lot of different complicated skills, whether it's, Magic, chess, violin, carpentry, whatever you're talking about, whether it's mental or physical or both, though it's often often there's a heavy component to both, even in the more physical tasks, right? Mm-hmm. And it takes like 10,000 hours as like a threshold that matters. And I don't know how much it matters, how much of it is pop science, but the thing stands. If you look at, let's just say, look at the current, like you take the top 20 players at the end of any given year. How many of those players do you think have spent 10,000 hours on playing Magic? Every single one. How many have spent 20,000 hours?
Right.
Probably all of them as well. Like, I don't know how many hours. To put it in context, I guess 10,000 hours is something like 5 years of 40 hours a week. And, I think that, or I'm confident that in the 20 years I've been playing Magic, I certainly haven't averaged 40 hours a week. But if you look at, there's been weeks where I've done more than that, and I spent a lot of time thinking about that. If you include those, which, the number of classes in college where I'm writing deck lists in the margins when I'm supposed to be taking notes, that sort of thing. So time is a huge part of it. And I don't want to be discouraging, but if you want to be the best at something, you have to spend a ton of time at it. There's just no way around it. No one who's the best at anything has not spent inordinate amounts of time. Now, to take a step back to be a little bit more useful for this actual question, because we're not getting asked, how do I become the best at this? Just how do I get better at this? There's definitely ways you can do that don't require sticking your whole life into it. I'm not advising you do that. I think some innate skills are definitely like, you actually have the strongest one, which is a willingness to learn and not blame external things and look at what can I learn out of every draft, not how did I get unlucky? Because look, if you dig deep enough, yeah, you got unlucky in some spots when you lose. That's generally the case. But the more useful part is, what could I have done better? How could I have affected the outcome? What could I improve on? And once you're starting to hit those notes, it's really good. And then, yeah, memory matters to a degree. Repetition and learning the patterns and stuff do matter. One of the strengths of limited is it's less pattern recognition and more learning fundamentals. Yeah. If you play standard enough, like I have known people who are very good at standard and quite poor outside of that, who basically haven't played enough of other formats or limited in particular and focus so much on constructed that they're really honed their pattern recognition skills to maybe to the expense of like dealing with novel situations. Mm-hmm. So I think it can be frustrating when you look at like, hey, some of my innate skills that seem to be tested here aren't where I want them to be. But I think the attitude of what can I do to improve? How can I work around that is really good. And I think in general, trying to learn and improve, I find to be the strongest and best force in most any endeavor. If you're learning and improving, you're just going to incrementally get better. And you're not really, I don't think it's that useful to compare yourself to the best in the world until you get close to that point. Like, I don't know, Marshall, you don't feel bad when you look at Joe Rogan's podcast numbers. Like, right. Like, you're not competing with him. Like, you're not, I mean, in a sense you are, because you're both podcasts, that's what we're doing here. But there's no way that can or should make you feel bad. Likewise, if you're trying to get better at Magic, I wouldn't compare yourself to the best in the world, because, they put in a vastly differing amount of time and effort to do what they're doing. You like playing basketball. You don't compare yourself to NBA players. They'd wipe the floor with you. Right. A good college player would wipe the floor with you. Yeah. That doesn't take away from what you're doing. It doesn't mean you can't be better than the Marshall of 6 months ago, though you're actually worse now because of quarantine. I am. So, but it's kind of the way I look at it, because, my preparedness and kind of like up to the minute like skill does vary, right, between different periods of my life, different tournaments, different times. I kind of just want to live up to my own standards of like, have I done a good faith effort job of preparing? And do I know what's going on? Below a certain threshold, I'm unhappy with myself. But no, I don't expect to be the best player in the world. I just don't. And, that there have been times when I think I could compete for that, and I put in the time and effort to do so. Now is generally not one of those times. So at that point, I think it's just really useful to look internally and just try to figure out, not, hey, what am I bad at? Or like, I'm bad at these things that other people are good at. It's more like, hey, I'm me. I've got to work with, this is what I've got to work with. How can I be better than me of last week?
Yeah. The other thing that I would add is that people tend to look at the finished product when it comes to like like what you were talking about, a Magic player, an athlete or something like that, and go, man, that person's so talented or they're so good. And it isn't always the case. It just isn't. I've watched many of the people that we consider the best Magic players now. When I first came on and started doing coverage and was, getting to know the pro scene more, they were not. They just weren't. They were way lower on the totem pole. At that point, one of the ones that comes to mind is Reed, right? I mean, Reed is considered one of the best Magic players, full stop. He's in the Hall of Fame, has utterly awesome, consistent results over what is now a long period of time. But I remember the first Worlds we did, they called it the Players Championship at that one year. And, he came in and got trounced. And, he kind of famously wrote down a list of all the mistakes that he found in his games and the things that he wanted to work on. Just diligent, right? I mean, this wasn't some guy who just picked up a deck of Magic cards and it all just came together for him, right? He'd been playing since he was very young, about 5 years old. So he had an edge and he was certainly good at Magic. But, it took him getting in a testing team with the William Huey Jensens and the John Finkels and you and stuff like that to really recognize and fully realize his potential as a player. And even now, he still works really hard. This isn't one of those things where Reed was born and just was like picked up a deck of cards and knew everything and figured out how to do it. He really had to work at it. Now the fact that he's really smart helped him. I mean, it did. And that's something that is an advantage that he had. But I mean, I would look at him as somebody as a kind of a classic 10,000 hours type person, somebody with potential. But he really did put in the work for it. And he's just one of many examples of people that they'll even say it, right? And it's funny because honestly, Luis, you're the one they usually compare themselves to, or they'll say like, I'm not like Luis because you are special in that way. But most of the players at the highest level are people that really did have to just simply work. And they still have to. They still have to play a constructed format for hours and hours and hours and hours before they really feel like they get it. So, if that's a goal for you, Michelle, I think that, you have some of the really difficult bases covered already. And you're probably being a little too hard on yourself for the other stuff. Because I'll say people that ask questions like this, Michelle said they have really high blah, 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 intelligence or whatever. These are the type of questions that successful players ask. So I'll just put it that way. Okay, let's call it a show here, Luis, because I have to go get on another broadcast. And we've been going for a while, but maybe we'll come back to these again. There's so many good questions that we didn't still have a chance to get to. But I do like taking our time with them too. I really feel like it's more fun to kind of delve in. Anyway, we'll talk about it. In the meantime, that's going to do it for this one. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com, including all the episodes of the show. And I'll also put in a link in the show notes to that special episode if you haven't had a chance to listen to that yet. It did come out a while ago now, a few years back. But I put a super extra amount of time into it because I had never done a show like that. To be honest, bit off more than I could chew. I kind of was okay with that. But then when I got into doing the actual work of it, I was like, wow, like I've really gone too deep here. But I was too far down the rabbit hole. I'm like, I'm going to finish this thing up. I would approach it differently if I were to do another one. But I'm proud of how that one came out. And it's very, very informative. If you're into the type of questions that Michelle asked, this is the episode for you for sure. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And then you can find all the other episodes of the show there too on LRcast. Also, the show's brought to you by Channel Fireball. We mentioned at the top, but lots of exciting stuff going on over at CFB. Next month, there'll be another one of those, what do you call them? Challenge showdowns?
The CFP Pro Showdown.
Yeah. So another one of those featuring a man I just talked about, Reed Duke, as the end boss there. Try to double your money if you do end up getting through there. And that's, of course, related to CFB Pro, which is all the information is over on the site. And then Byless Bonanza Part 2 coming up again. Let's get some cards into CFB and get that flow of cards and money and store credit and all that stuff going, as well as some cool prizes for those of you that take part during the time frame. And you can find information for that over at Channel Fireball as well. That's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for hanging out. Everybody stay safe and we'll see you next week.
Alrighty, Marshall, I know you're in a bit of a hurry here, so I won't drag it on too long. But for those who listened before the Arena Open this weekend, there's a cool tournament being run on Arena where you have to go 7-2 on day one to make day two, but you can continue buying day one entries as long as you want, and you get to play asynchronously, which is you just fire a match, go eat lunch, fire another match, or whatever, because it just continuous play. And day one is kind of weird structure. And to be clear, this tournament's run by Wizards. I have nothing to do with it. So this isn't. I'm not surreptitiously getting another ad in here. Day one is best of one, and day two is best of three. So I wanted to recommend. I think the two decks I would consider for day one would be Mono Red Obosh. I think is quite good in the best of one format. Especially since the hand smoothing that best of one has does really help aggressive decks. They really want to draw their exact 2 to 3 land opener rather than a land heavy hand, and they don't have very many ways to smooth it out besides that. So they get a good edge out of that. And I would also sideboarding really does help, or the lack of sideboarding rather helps, because the opponents can't really board in their anti-aggro cards, right? And aggro tends to be a little more linear. The other deck I would recommend, of course, is Jeskai Luka. I think that that deck's really good. I would play Jeskai Luka with extra main deck Deafening Clarions. It would be what I would be looking to play on day one. And then day two, I would likely just play Jeskai Luka. I think there's a small argument for Team of Reclamation if you really like that deck, but I would be leaning towards playing Jeskai Luka. I know that there's a Winota deck that's gotten pretty popular recently, but Deafening Clarion is good against that deck. So I think that those are the decks I'd recommend. I don't actually think I'm going to play this weekend, but we'll see. Maybe I might end up firing it up. Who knows?